basically what was going on. And then later it started becoming like when I moved back to Delhi, it became a lot of Indian fusion music. And I think I used that as a way to sort of rediscover my Indian identity also. So like I started listening to
Right,
Indian Ocean and Shakti and a lot of Indian based artists
right.
who are in the indie music scene. And then since from then on I started studying music, so it was like a lot of blues and R&B and then like headfirst into jazz while in music school.
Right. So since we're talking about like sort of the chronology, so then after Delhi, then you straight away moved to Boston to study at Berkeley, or
No, I went to University of Toronto for a year.
okay, okay,
Yeah,
and that
studying
was for
liberal arts.
music or
No, that was
something else?
for like political science and history.
Okay,
And then I moved, and then I transferred after a year to
interesting.
Boston to Berkeley. Yeah. But
Okay,
while I was there, I ended up meeting all. I just ended up having to like by coincidence was living in a dorm area with all the music students from the music faculty. Sort of just by coincidence. I think maybe in my interests. While I was filling out my interests, everything
that's
was just related to
interesting.
music.
Okay,
So like I think I was the only other person who like filled out all these music interests along with all the other music students. So I was just sharing a room with musicians and it was like all my friends were musicians and they like heavily informed my decision to like study music. Because until that
oh,
point you don't know
okay.
what music education really is, especially if you're self-taught. So I didn't know what, music theory was, I didn't know what serious private lessons were, I didn't know what having a faculty of musicians was like. But then when I finally got introduced to that, I was like, okay, this is like they have homework and stuff. Like
Yeah,
they're
you have
serious
a lot of stuff too.
students.
You don't just
Yeah,
sit at home and just play guitar. That's not how it is.
exactly. Yeah,
You
and
have
that's
to
what
you
I
have
thought it
a
was, and that's what everyone told me it was. So
wow.
uh,
And then you sort of transferred to Berkeley.
yeah, I transferred to Berkeley. Berkeley
Yeah,
was always a target. Like I had heard of it when I was, I think,
right.
14. But then it was just this like really distant dream. So I never really thought of doing it until I went to, it was close enough geographically where I was like, okay, maybe I can go for like a summer program. Then I ended up
Mm.
going for the summer program and then applying.
So how did your sort of sound develop? Because you've kind of created and crafted your own sound as a guitar player and composer. And how did sort of like who were your influences at that point? Because obviously, I can so hear like I was checking out Storm and Dust. You have that whole rock sort of thing happening, but then you have a lot of harmonic sort of chances that you take, which obviously are coming from different other influences. So how did sort of that come around in your music, and when did you start writing this kind of a style of your own sort of music?
I mean, anything you do kind of informs your playing, kind of bleeds into your playing at various stages of your
Right.
musical career. But at Berkeley, I kind of head first like dove into jazz and modern jazz.
Hmm.
Partly because it was what everyone who was amazing at Berkeley was like playing jazz. So you're like, this is the thing that
Gotta get, yeah.
And so then I did that, and I didn't necessarily resonate with like older or traditional jazz, especially bebop, right away because it's something that I think you need to be entrenched in. Like there's a big cultural aspect of it, there's a big historical aspect, there's a big like geographical aspect to it too. Like if you
True.
live close to New York City, you're just exposed to it and there's weight in it. But if you don't, bebop can lose some of that because there's so much social commentary within just the music itself. So like if you miss that, you actually end up missing what the music is really about.
Yeah.
So I was resonating a lot more with modern jazz that had influences from indie rock and things that I was already sort of accustomed to hearing. And so then having this music like I remember Invisible Cinema, which was big for both of us because I think we
Exactly.
talked
Yes.
about it.
Yes. Yes.
But Aaron Parks' record, I remember listening to Nemesis, that song that was
Right.
in Seven, and like it's got this like really lush harmony. That was kind of this like, oh my god, like you can have this rock kind of sensibility, this like rock angsty kind of sound, but also explore like really lush harmony that isn't
Harmony.
necessarily
Right.
diatonic or isn't necessarily limited to playing power chords or something. Which there's nothing wrong in playing power chords, but it's just there's a lot more to music that you can explore also if you'd like
Exactly.
to. So that
Right.
was a good place for me to sort of exist while also kind of putting my foot in and playing and learning just more traditional, older styles of jazz. And over time, I've come to really appreciate just being able to play like a standard in its truest form. I don't think I can do it with enough conviction as someone who's been doing it for a lot longer than I have. But I really am now trying to practice that a lot more, just for myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
But just because I enjoy the sound. But yeah, that's sort of what it was. It was
Plus, you
always
live
just
in New
like,
York, so
and I live in New York, so like you hear it
yeah.
all the time, and
Exactly.
it's an
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
part of the city's history. So
Right. Yeah.
I think from any genre, there's always things you can take from the genre that are really, really kind of key, like hallmarks of
Right.
the genre. So, like from rock music, I very much found the way to sort of really to dig in and kind of be dirty with your tone and with your sound and with your even with your playing and timing and stuff. Like
Yeah.
a lot of that really adds character to the sound. And with jazz, what I really took away was this like idea of just being like super free and spontaneous and
Mm.
being getting really comfortable in being like wrong, quote unquote. So like you make a mistake and it's not like, oh my god, the whole band is totally lost. And that is a really really freeing way to approach playing music. And then also from jazz, there's just this whole rich history of music theory and harmony,
Mm.
which I haven't found in too many other styles of music aside from things that birthed this genre of jazz that we sort of know
Yeah.
today. It has now become into this place where you can be a student of music theory and write music, and I love that. I love this idea that you can explore music theory and find new things, almost like you're like a researcher or something. And
You released an EP, Becoming, earlier this year. You released it, and then the pandemic hit the world. So how has that sort of
yeah.
affected, what happened after that?
Becoming was released in February, and then the pandemic started in March. In between those two moments, we were able to tour India, and that was the
Right.
only place we actually played Becoming live. I think actually, barring two cities in the U.S. Barring we played a show at Yale and a show in Boston, and that was it. And then we
Wow.
went to India for 2 weeks, and then that was it. That was the beginning and end of our Becoming tour.
Oh man.
It's called Becoming because it's about embracing, very much embracing your past self. And as a musician who started to play like serious music and started learning music in a serious format, I found in order for me to really get serious about music, I had to do a lot of rejection of this like music that I used to play, as a kid and stuff. For many years, and I was kind of just like, okay, that stuff is like when you're a child, you don't really mess with that anymore. Now this is the serious stuff that you get
Serious.
into.
Yeah.
And I did that for ages, and I was very happy doing that too. But then I think for this EP, I was like, okay, let me see what it would be like if I wrote music today, just while just also having all this old like influence from when I'm age 11 to age whatever 16, 17. Like those are really formative years in your music,
Definitely. Yeah.
and your guitar playing and stuff. So then I listened to a lot of old records, like the Blink records and Boxcar Racer records and stuff for about a
Wow.
year while I was writing that music, just to really get like back in touch with that stuff. And it really, it really like it was kind of a cathartic experience to like bring that
Wow.
into my like modern day playing. So it's almost like if I had brought like 14-year-old Shub and put him now with all this music experience that I have now, what would you write like? And that's
Yeah.
sort of what ended up happening. Was I was uninhibited and I just wrote like it was okay, this section needs power chords, then so be it. It needs like palm
Exactly.
muted chords or distortion, then that's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna shy away from it thinking that, oh my god, what'll people say if this is not jazz and this is not whatever. So I just kind of let that sort of go, and that was the whole idea behind the EP. Was like embrace this many years of playing guitar alone in your room trying to like figure it out. Just put a lot of that energy into an EP, and that's what it was.
So now I can see there's a whole bunch of questions. Maybe I'll just sort of go over them, and then you can sort of do it like a Q&A round. Yeah.
Sure.
So, okay. So the first one is, what's Shubh's process of writing in odd time, and also his process of composing melodies?
That's a great question. So my process of writing an odd time is the odd time never really comes before the idea. I usually let the idea dictate what time it's going to be in or
Right.
signature it's going to be in. I do a lot of like arpeggiation and stuff on the guitar, and so that stuff lends itself to having phrases that don't necessarily add up in four. So if there's like an arpeggio of like 7 notes and then an arpeggio of 5 notes and then an arpeggio of like 4 notes, you have like a nice kind of like uneven sort of feeling where you're jumping between different things. So that's how I end up writing a lot of my music. Off late now, I've been exploring a lot of like for the past maybe 2 years, it kind of what polyrhythms feel like and how they imply
Mm,
certain sort of feelings, and that I've been messing around with. So there are some songs that originated from a polyrhythmic idea that I was playing, but it always is the idea first. So it's always messing around on the guitar, and then realizing, okay, this is in this time signature. And for
great.
melodies, a lot of melodies I try to be as organic as possible. Of course, there's some working out after you analyze the progression. You need to hit certain notes that imply certain things and certain emotions. But for the most part, I try to be as like trying to make them as singable as possible. So I'll like sing a lot of the melodies before while I'm playing it. And if that's too hard, then I'll record it and then try to
Record it. Yeah.
jam over the progression. For any like really pretty melodies, I always just hear the sound of like more Indian inflections and
Mm,
phrasing and stuff. So that's how some of my phrasing is more inspired by Indian folk music, classical music, and sort of Arabic folk music. Just because to me, that's what when I think of a beautiful melody, that's what it sounds like. I think because in music like that, the melody is given like this, almost like this reverential treatment where like how you phrase the melody and how you approach a note from whether it's from below or above or you're pulling off or you're
right.
hammering on or like there's so much emphasis and respect given to each note within the melody that it lends itself to being really pretty. So that's how I end up writing a lot of my melodies
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
envisioning how I want to like what I want to say with this melody.
And how do you go about naming your compositions? That's an interesting question.
Oh, that's a good question. It comes from a lot of things that I end up reading or coming across. But for Hamira and Had, it was a lot of reading that I was doing at the time. You go through phases of books and one leads you to another. So at the time, I was doing a lot of reading about religion and comparative religion and like the history of religion and stuff. And I found that very fascinating. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I just found the whole idea of spiritualism an interesting thing to study about. In the past, my titles have been extremely complicated. Becoming was the opposite, where I was like, I want only one word, very specific, very one word titles to describe each song.
Hmm.
And so that's what Becoming was.
All right. The next question is, what are the technical challenges of having two drummers, and why do you have two drummers in the band?
Because why not? Is the answer.
That's a good. Okay.
Um, the technical challenges are that, of course, you need two drummers that are super locked in. But more than the ability to lock in, you need two drummers that have zero ego about how they approach playing because like so much of the two drummer thing is giving and taking, and
Mm,
at some point one drummer is always taking a supportive role and then the other drummer is taking the sort of more forward motion role, and then it always switches, and it's kind of like a ebb and flow of those two things. So you
mm,
have to have two human beings who are very open to those ideas, and Josh and Angelo and Sean, who played with us in India, are like three examples of amazing humans who have the ability to be like, yeah, I'll support you on this, you go for it.
mm.
And then the other person be like, yeah, you know what, I'll support you, you go for this section. And that's happening conversationless, it's just
Right.
happening while you're playing. Of course, there's a lot of rehearsal that goes into it, but like, a lot of those spontaneous decisions are made on the fly. But why I have it is because we had Angelo playing drums and Josh playing percussion on Hamira on the first record we recorded. And then Josh started playing percussion with us live, which he wasn't doing before. And then I think at one show he had to sub in on drums, get Angelo could make it. And so he learned the whole repertoire on drums. And so I was like, dude,
Oh,
what if
okay.
you just played like snare and kick also, just to beef it up? And then slowly we just started adding one tom by tom. We
Mm.
decided a whole drum
Tom
set.
by Tom. That's
And by like we were playing this monthly Rockwood show. This is Rockwood is a club in New York in the Lower East
right.
Side, and we were playing there monthly. And so by the end of 6 months, it was basically two drum sets playing at any given time. And then we just love the sound of it because there's just
Yeah.
this, the drums in itself are like seven instruments in one. So having 14 instruments of percussion is like,
Definitely. Yeah.
it's such a cool sound. You just have to have the people who are willing to make it work. But if you do
Right.
have two people who are willing to make it work, then it's really actually quite easy.
Thank you, Shub, for being with us today
Yeah,
and
thank you for
sharing
having me.
so much about your life and what you're doing as an artist. And everybody here, thank you for joining us today, and hope to see all of you soon. Great. Once again,
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank
All
you.
right, so
Thank
we'll
you, everyone, for
thank you,
tuning
man.
in.